that I can tell you my words will not pass away empty. That's what he means. Let us think about the 7 churches, the people there. They know the Lord Jesus. They love him. We can understand a bit about them because we can read the book of Galatians and Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and Thessalonians, because that's to whom these letters were addressed, and those cities in the whole of Asia Minor, which is Turkey. Here they are. They've heard the gospel. They've been taught incessantly by whatever apostle came along, by John himself, by Paul. He was often there. They would have been taught by Peter, and many others would have come to them from the main city in Jerusalem and in those areas. Not to mention, there could have been preachers from Corinth and so forth, going backwards and forwards as they do today, preaching in different churches. So undoubtedly, they knew what Jesus had prophesied in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. And as a matter of fact, these were educated people, many of them. They would have had amongst them copies of the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, even the Acts. They had copies amongst them of what Paul had written, because remember, Paul was martyred in the mid-60s, same as Peter. They'd already written their letters years before. So the churches would have had knowledge of what the Lord Jesus himself had said in Matthew 24 and in Luke 17. And we mention this because the whole of the book of Revelation basically does not hinge on the book of Daniel. It does not hinge on the book of Ezekiel or any part of the Old Testament. It doesn't hinge on it. It mentions things. It hinges on what Jesus himself has taught. And I myself have never seen this before, and I have to say that the whole church is blind to it, as I was too. It hinges on what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13 and so forth. And so we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 24 and just see a few things that we can point out. In Matthew 24, of course, which is very familiar, and most people have heard it, how that the disciples and Jesus were coming out of the temple, and the disciples in chapter 24, verse 1, they said, as they looked at the buildings of the temple, they wanted Jesus to have a look at them. It's rather strange to me, because this was not the first occasion on which he was at the temple. Anyway, they came out of the temple, or Jesus did, and the disciples were around. They came up to him and showed him the buildings of the temple. This is the King James Version. They were showing him the beauty of them. They were a wonder of the world, a wonder of the Roman Empire, because the temple had been built by Herod, who was a great architect, and probably got his architecture that went way back to the fallen angels who handed over certain knowledge to certain people, and they were still around. Herod was a very, very wicked man, very wicked indeed. Then Jesus said in verse 2, "Do you not see all these things? Have a look at them," he's saying. Have a good look. "Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." the temple had to be destroyed. Now those Christians in the 7 churches would have heard all this. Somebody would have taught them, or they would have heard it read from some of the scrolls that they would have had. Then in verse 3, they went somewhere else, of course, onto the Mount of Olives. So then the disciples come to him and said, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" Now people make a mistake when they look at the end of the age. What they don't realize, it's concerning the age of the Jews, the age of Israel. Now let us look into this further. He's told them about the destruction of the temple. That's in their mind. Then they say, when will these things be, the destruction of the temple? And what will be the sign of your coming? Because they expected him somehow or other to come back again, and still their expectation was he would sit on the throne of Israel and restore the kingdom of David in a natural sense. So then they said, "Oh, so what's the end of this age? Because you're going to introduce another age, Lord, on earth." That's what they thought. But the Lord Jesus, of course, knew that that was not going to happen like that. And he did instruct them in Acts chapter 1 verse 7 that they were not to be concerned about the end time of Israel, that they were not to be concerned because everything was in God's hands, in the Father's hands. He held time in his hand. When he decided it was going to happen, it would certainly happen. That's what Jesus was saying. He goes on further about all those things that we have dealt with on other occasions. But then in verse 34, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away." So what is he saying? He's saying all this that I've been telling you about in chapter 24, and he repeats it in Luke. He says, this generation, my disciple friends, this generation in which you are, that would extend for another 30 years or so. He says that will not have passed away. There will still be people living. He didn't say they would be. And then he goes on to say, it is so assured that I can tell you my words will not pass away empty. That's what he means when he's speaking about in verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away. He then says, of course, in the saying of that, yeah, heaven and earth will pass away. This heaven and earth will pass away. But my words will not pass away. It will happen. Now he's not trying to prophesy then as to anything about heaven and earth. He's just stating a fact. Then he says in the same scene in Luke 17, verse 22, the days will come when you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. That verse is neglected. He is saying, I'm telling you about the coming of the Son of Man, and the days are coming when you disciples, not necessarily the 12 disciples, He had other disciples there who followed him around. And he's saying, some of you will wish that you could see the days of the Son of Man. But he's saying to some of them, like his 12 disciples, you won't see it. You'll be gone. And then he talks about a scene that historians tell us happened, that there were people coming, men coming and saying, between those 3.5 years, 67 to 70 AD, I'm Messiah, and he's saying, it won't be me. Don't go looking. He says, for as the lightning that flashes out of the one part of heaven and shines to the other part, so also the Son of Man will be in his day. In other words, the Son of Man is going to come. Some of you will be dead. Some of you will still be here. He's going to come in their lifetime. It's nothing to do with the end of the world or the restoring of Israel and the millennium to come. Nothing to do with it. Because he said some will be there and some will not. And of course that had to be within 30 years or so, or 40 at the most, of what he said. But then he says this, first, he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. So he's about to go to the cross some time later, and he's saying, yes, I'm telling you these things, which is about the coming of the Son of Man, which of course, which Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark are all about, if you read them. So he says he must suffer. Well, we know he did. But this is the important part. He must be rejected by this generation that's not going to pass away until all these things I've preached to you happen. Do you get the importance of that? Then he says, and as it was in the days of Noah, so it also will be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate and drank and so forth, until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Noah's safe. The millions of other people were destroyed. When the Lord comes in the air to take us to glory, we will be taken to glory. The others will be taken by destruction and judgment and hell. So to use that verse, which is what is done, is an absolute lack of thinking to even attempt it. Then he says in verse 30, even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Is revealed. So you can apply that to Revelations 1 verse 7. Every eye shall see him. With the mind they will understand. He's going to be revealed. Now he did not come in person. He was on the throne. But he was revealed in all the judgmental things that were happening. And historians tell us many, and I have quoted some over a period of time. It's all there, laid out in history. He was revealed in heaven. Let's understand the things that happen on earth are first of all, well, God had to think them, but in heaven they are spoken. In heaven there is some order of bustling going on, preparing angels. Maybe the Son and the Father are talking. There's activity there. And remember, not only are angels there are saints who've departed this life. They're not there fast asleep. They are there participating in the activity of heaven. The book of Revelation tells us that. And the activity of heaven involves the activity of God in his people down here and in all the judgments that go on, specifically that went on at that time in relation to Israel. There was great activity. It was spoken. It would have been recorded in the books of heaven, because we find from some of the lost books of the Bible that we've been looking into, particularly the book of Enoch, all the writing that went on in heaven, it's in the books. We know about the books, because in Revelation it tells us at the end of time, when the judgment day has come, the books will be opened. So this is a heavenly matter that's unseen to anybody on earth, but nevertheless it transpires. So the announcement would have gone forth throughout the course of heaven in relation to Jesus Christ being at the right hand of God, sitting on the throne, about to pour out his judgment and on evil harlot Jerusalem, who crucified him, and all those who rejected him, and also that he was going to protect his own, who lived not only in Jerusalem, but who lived throughout the whole land of Israel. They would also to be protected. See, this is what it means when the Son of Man is revealed. I looked up the Greek dictionary. To lay open what has been veiled and covered up. To disclose what before was unknown. So all those people there in Israel had disclosed to them in some way what was unknown. They didn't even know it was going to happen. The disciples did. The believers did. Or to lay open what has been veiled or covered up. The decision had already been made in heaven. The plans were already made throughout the whole of the Old Testament period. The plans were there in heaven. The writing was going on in heaven all those centuries. This is what Israel has done. She has killed this prophet. She has gone into idolatry time and time again. All written in heaven. And suddenly it's unveiled or made known or laid bare, not in words but in actions. And the actions were all the supernatural things that were happening around Jerusalem and Israel at that time, and there were many supernatural things. I think we read some out a couple of times ago. And there were supernatural appearances in the skies, over the temple. You can read about it in history. Supernatural acts. God was doing something through his Son, Jesus Christ. The Son of Man was being revealed in his judgmental capacity. But this is the important part. He must be rejected by this generation that's not going to pass away until all these things I've preached to you happen.